Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Big East Rewind. I am your 7-foot host, Chuck Everson, and my partner, as always, my point guard, Sonny Spera from Syracuse University. How are you, Sonny?
Chuck, I'm doing great. This is a guest that we've been sort of tracking for a while. Pretty excited to have him on.
We have, and it's been great.
Stalking him almost stalking.
I can make you regret that in a few minutes.
I bet you could.
I was hesitating to use the word stalk. I'll tell you that much. But I was
That's right. You don't want to use that word, Sonny. So, look, without any further ado, let me introduce our guest, Sonny. Today we have our guest has covered everything from the Georgetown Hoyas to the Olympics to the Super Bowl and everything in between. He's a Naismith Hall of Famer, Sonny, another Hall of Famer.
Another Hall of Famer, baby.
Another Hall of Famer, okay? Now the co-host of Pardon the Interruption with his partner, Tony Kornheiser, from the south side of Chicago, my main man, Michael Wilbon. How are you, Mike?
Chuck, Sonny, I'm good, man. It's good to join you guys. I have heard so much hype over your podcast and how great it is. I have so many people offering testimony. I'm like, my goodness, can't wait for it.
Well, it's been a lot of fun, Mike. I mean, Sonny and I met, everybody knows now, Sonny and I met on a recruiting trip. I was visiting Syracuse and he was my host. So we've been friends since 81, 82. And did a show with the Georgetown guys. They had a thing called the Hoya Locker Room. And we said, you know what, we should do that for the Big East. And it's been a lot of fun. You're getting to know guys that you played against that you never really had conversations with before,
Sure.
It's really cool. And especially there was some, perceptions of certain teams and certain guys, and turns out they're the nicest guy. They're the nicest guys we've talked to since we've been doing this.
That's
so
great. As long as it's 30 years later. Almost 40,
that's
almost
right.
40
Well,
years later. That's even better.
That's right. We don't have to step on the court with them anymore. So that part's good. So
we got through the paranoia. Let's say that.
Oh, I remember those days quite well.
We broke down all those barriers, Mike. So it was good. It was really good. So it's been a lot of fun. So let's kick this off. So growing up in the south side of Chicago, tough neighborhood, right? That's a tough area, isn't it?
Yeah.
Talk about that for a minute and how and I know you went to St. Ignatius and you went to a Catholic school and talk about growing up in the south side of Chicago, what that was like as a young kid.
Wow, it's so, I hear it portrayed now, and you see it portrayed. You see things like the Chicago PD show, where you see all kinds of fictional portrayals, and they try to weave in nonfiction. But when I was growing up there, I didn't see it as a canvas for future artistic impression. It was just where I grew up. It's where I lived. I grew up there with a lot of people in the sports world, particularly the basketball world. The South Side has produced some football players now. Dick Butkus, Ray Nitschke. You guys aren't quite old enough to know those names.
I remember Butkus.
Butkus, yeah.
Those guys were South Side Chicago guys, but it was more basketball people. From more modern names like Derrick Rose, who grew up. We grew up adjacent. He was in Inglewood. I was in West Chatham, but the same floor. We sort of played on. That's the only thing I have in common with Derrick. They would let me in Simeon to get out of the cold and snow to play on that floor. But guys like him played on it for real, and Dwayne Wade, and going back, Mo Cheeks and Ricky Green, and all kinds of more famous names. I'm leaving out some because they don't come to mind immediately, but they're people I grew up watching. You could drive down the street on one of the famous streets on 79th Street and see Muhammad Ali shooting dice with guys, maybe including my father. So, this is a plot of land, and later it produced Carol Moseley Braun, and then later the 44th president of the United States of America, Barack Obama. And we all grew up. He didn't grow up. He was in Hawaii, and he came there. But the rest of us, some of those names I mentioned, we grew up there, going to high school. Mo Cheeks played for my uncle at DuSable High School. We grew up, whatever we did, we did more than one sport. I mentioned basketball. All those guys who were great Kirby Puckett, the Hall of Fame baseball player, sure. The Minnesota Twins, hit one of the longest home runs in the history of high school baseball against me, throwing him some fat pitch in an early inning. And we all grew up, together, aspiring. Everybody played multiple sports. If you played one sport, you were an outcast. Get out. Get out. You one sport? Because even if you weren't any good at the others, you had to play. It was just.
Was that the type of thing, Mike, where you'd have a bunch of kids like the Sandlot movie and you'd play sport to sports?
Yes.
That's how it was growing up for me in Long Island. I was still tight with those guys,
Of course it was. And, this notion of one sport, I get on my son all the time. And there's nothing he can do about it because he got to have practice. And then you got to go to the AAU and you got a travel team. And you got your high school. And it's like, it's really sort of made sports less than what it ought to be in terms of the spirit of competition and and then with the west side of Chicago, which there were rivalries. That's where, we often played this, because I went to Catholic high school. We played against Isaiah Thomas at St. Joe's, Doc Rivers. I saw my brother play against those guys. And so we had great basketball, and we'd like to put our basketball up against anybody's. And I would argue when I see these guys, with Kenny Smith and with Chris Mullen, with Mully, and he would say, wait a minute, this guy played against him on the AAU team, he's from Chicago. And I argue this stuff with the Detroit guys. And, and it's a point of pride. And we did that. I was not good enough to be on a basketball court with those guys. I was good enough to be on a diamond with them. And some guys were really, really, really great at multiple sports. So it was, I just took it for granted. It's where I grew up. It's where I came of age. I have an apartment in Chicago now. I try to sneak back and go back whenever I can. I see some of those guys. People have come back now in our older age. I saw Mark Aguirre walking down the street one day, and Mark, who's on the west side, I said, Mark, what are you doing? He goes, same thing you're doing. I got an apartment here. To say, hey, and people are coming back there and enjoying the city in ways that we did not when we were young and could not, but can now. So it's a point of pride.
So wow. in your high school days, you were a player. Did you also have this interest in the writing and the creativity aspect?
Yeah, because I knew I wasn't good enough.
that wasn't what I meant.
But that's all right. That's all right, because that's the fact. I was good enough as a baseball player. Could I have played? I played high school baseball in the nations. Could I have played college baseball? Yes. I'm not going to be phony modesty on that. Could I have played basketball? Hell no. I wasn't good enough to play high school basketball. I wasn't. I was a decent pickup player. I was never the last guy chosen. Never. Never the first either.
Solid. That's solid.
I was somewhere closer to the top. At least that's the way I tell it now. And but yeah, I knew that I wanted to. By the time I was 50, there's a moment. Look, you guys played big time. You guys played at friggin'. I mean, come on. You played in the Big East. You played in Villanova and Syracuse. You know what big time basketball was. You knew at some point, like 13 or 14 years old, there was a separation, right? Yeah. Like everybody was fairly even at 12, and then all of a sudden, zoom, like somebody did something on the playground one day, and the people who were smart enough said, yeah, let me go to plan B on this thing. And that's what certainly happened to me on the playground. And I knew I wanted to marry my two interests, sports and writing. I knew when I was in 5th grade that I was the number one draft choice in that. I just had that. My mother was a teacher. I could diagram sentences in 5th grade so well that I would challenge the teacher and say, no, that's not right. This is that sentence. I was that kid. And it wasn't as nerdy because I was so cocky about it, but I knew the language. I knew how to control the language. I knew how to more or less master at that age the language. And I knew I could marry the two interests. Yeah. And so, because I knew I got bored easily and I needed to do something that I love to do. And so that was it. Those two things were it.
So then your travels take you now to Northwestern, right? And their prestigious, program. Talk about what that was like. There's a lot of big time guys that came out of there too. We talk all the time. Sonny's a Syracuse guy. Obviously, that's a media haven.
Yes, it is.
Everybody and their brother who's anybody, you hear about that. But there's a whole bunch of guys that came out of where you went to school.
Oh my God! I'll tell you briefly. One of my favorite stories. Sonny, you'll appreciate this. I get a call one day from Mike Tirico, a Hall of Fame Syracuse alum.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. In the business. And we do have a rivalry, guys. I mean, the rivalry, Medill and Syracuse and Newhouse. I mean, that's a rivalry, and it is totally out of respect and knowing the colleagues, the great graduates from the other program, whichever one you're in. And so I get a call from Tarico, and he says, all right, I'm calling you. This pains me to tell you that my daughter wants to go to Northwestern, and she wants to go to Medill. This brought me great joy. It still brings me great joy that his daughter is at Northwestern. And yes, these are two great programs. You hope to be able to go to one or the other. And yeah, I went to Medill at Northwestern in my backyard, 20 miles away from where I grew up. And it wasn't like I was looking to stay home, but why the hell would I leave when that program is 20 miles away? And I'm going to stay on campus. I'm going to be at a Big Ten school. I don't like to remind myself that my very first football game was against Notre Dame and a quarterback wearing number 3. Name was Montana. And I'm pretty sure we can look this up. The final score was 49-0. I think you know what direction that went. And so, but I was still at a Big Ten school. I had Big Ten sports kind of sort of back then. I had the greatest journalism experience that I believe I could have. And we had people that, yeah, they made you nervous competitively, guys, because they were so good. And I thought I was a late bloomer in it. But I knew I had the skills to be in the place. And if I worked hard enough and listened and learned and, gradually got better, that I should amount to something. And I loved my time there. I don't have this life without my time there.
So when do you get the Washington Post? Are you interning there when you're in school? How does that happen? Yep,
Sonny, I'm there. I'm applying like every kid in our 2 schools. I'm applying for all the great internships in America. Newsweek, the New York Times, the Washington Post. I did not apply for broadcast internships back then because, and this is a way that people like, I'm going to insert myself with him. I shouldn't. Bob Costas was a couple of years older than me. We had one side of the road or the other to try to figure out how to travel. Now, probably right after Tarico, people did their multimedia. These kids do it all now. They send you their clips and their resume of writing and their broadcast reels. We didn't have that. It was one or the other. So mine was print. I applied. All I wanted to do was work for my hometown newspaper, the Sun-Times, the Chicago Sun-Times or Tribune. They both turned me down. But the next week before I could let it sink in, the disappointment of being told no from by those two, I got accepted to Newsweek, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. So my ego was back intact. The Washington Post internship was sports. Newsweek and the New York Times were not. And by the way, I didn't feel I had to be in sports then. But I mean, if you're going to give me the choice, the Washington Post sports department with the people who were there at the time. So I said yes. I went to work the day after graduation, and I was there 2 summers and never came back.
Now, who are some of the guys on? Was that the Bullets? Was that like Unseld and Elvin Hayes and Pearl and?
I got there, and the parade was like that day.
That's heaven.
Well, not the parade, because they had won in the first of those 2 matchups, right? Yeah, so this is the next year. So the Bullets had lost in the finals to Gus Johnson and Seattle, DJ and John Johnson and Sigma and Freddie Brown. So they had lost to them. And by the way, so here's the other thing that's happening in DC. So the Bullets are on top of the world, right? They just played in 2 straight finals. Yeah. One of my early assignments from my sports editor was to go to the airport and meet Ray Leonard as he was coming back from the fight with Durant.
The No Mas fight or the before that?
I think it had to be No Mas because he won.
Right.
So this is insane. And I saw Ray Leonard not too long ago, and I said to him, Ray, you don't remember this, but. And it shows you like boxers are like golfers, it seems. I know some baseball players too, and that they remember every single thing that happened in their lives along the way, like every punch and every round and all that. Ray Leonard's like that now. Yeah. Ray's a couple of years older than me, so maybe 64, maybe. And I said, Ray, don't remember this, but I came to the airport to meet you after your fight. And he goes, yeah, I remember landing at DCA, and yeah, you were one of the guys there. That's how we met. What? Like, what? He's like, yeah, it was after the Duran fight, right? And it's just like, this guy has like this kind of recall, which is part of the greatness of any, as you guys know, a great athlete.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that's when I got to DC. That's what was going on. Not Joe Gibbs being hired.
So you really had to regret not going to Newsweek, obviously. Obviously.
Man, and you know what? Me? You know what? Well, I'm sure there were great things going on in New York at the time, Sonny. Because I got to Washington in that time and then was living in it, it's much fresher to me. Like, I think Eddie Murray might have been like Rookie of the Year or, right in there, maybe second season. And I started going to cover Orioles games. And then I did that the following summer. And then this kid comes up named Ripken. And, it was a pretty unbelievable time to be.
The Redskins were pretty good back then too at that time, no?
Joe Gibbs got there. 81, they draft Darryl Green.
Yeah.
John Riggins comes off of a holdout. It was just, I'm just thinking about some of these things for the first time. Joe Theismann was the quarterback and probably should have been MVP on one of those teams. But they were, yes. You had some greatness going on at that time in the area.
The Hogs.
So now, Mike, how do you go? I guess you get assigned to the Hoyas, right? As their beat guy in the 80s.
I get assigned to cover Georgetown basketball the year after they'd gone to the Elite Eight. They lost a chance to go to the Final Four against Iowa. Iowa went to the Final Four with Ronnie Lester and a backcourt mate, my best friend growing up, Kenny Arnold.
Oh, wow.
Who got drafted but never made the NBA. But your childhood friends from Chicago, Lute Olson, swallowed Chicago whole. I mean, he recruited Chicago much more than Bob Knight, not more than Ray Meyer, because that was backyard at DePaul. But yeah, so I get assigned to Georgetown because Big John was recruiting a kid from Ringen Latin High School in Boston named Patrick Ewing.
Yeah.
So we went from covering Georgetown, covering Georgetown with interest to covering Georgetown like the Redskins.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it changed.
Yeah.
So you were part of the, and I don't even want to say it out loud, but I have.
Say it.
You were part of the Manley Fieldhouse is officially closed. Wait a second. Get this out of my heart.
Sonny, actually, so my first season in Washington covering college basketball, I covered like the local scene. So it was more some Maryland, some Georgetown, but a lot of George Mason, a lot of GW, George Washington, Howard, everything, Navy, all of it. So I was not there for Big John's proclamation, Manley Fieldhouse is now officially closed. I know all about it because John loved it. He loved repeating the story. He loved telling it. In future years when I was covering Georgetown and covering Syracuse, I got to know Coach Boeheim. It seems like I've heard it so many times. I've seen it. I've relived it through them that it seems like I was there. I was not there. But my God, I know about it as if I was.
The thing that's amazing to me is that Boeheim got past that and they became friends.
Listen, I was there for that part too. I was there when it was so contentious that not only were they not speaking to each other, Jim wouldn't speak to me and Feinstein. I believe he always spoke to Tony Kornheiser. He wouldn't speak to us. Big John wouldn't speak to Elfin and whoever was covering Syracuse.
Yeah, Dave Elfin. Yeah, he was a Syracuse. Yeah.
And you know how it stopped? Dave Gavitt met with all of us and said, I want this over. I want this stopped. And he took at least Feinstein, Ken Denlinger, and myself to dinner when we got to Syracuse. I swear I wish I can remember the name of the restaurant. I can't.
Grimaldi's.
No, it wasn't Grimaldi's. I've been to Grimaldi's since.
Okay.
It was an Italian spot. I don't remember what it was. But
might have been Aunt Josie's.
He asked us to stop. The commissioner, how Ma and Pa was the conference at that point, where the commissioner calls up a coach and a couple of writers and says, okay, you're going to meet me and this is going to stop.
That's Dave Gavitt, though. That's Dave Gavitt.
It's such a simple thing. You would think it's common sense, Mike, but nobody did that. He was ahead of his time with relationship building and stuff.
He was, and he had the relationships, Chuck, as you know. He had the relationships personally to go to Big John or go to to Coach Boeheim to come to even the older writers who were, could be stars at that time nationally, and just say, no, we're not, fellas, we're not doing this. And he paid for dinner. He took us to dinner, and I was young. I was in awe because I was probably like 23 when that happened.
Wow. And
of course, it's later. I tell, like, my wife's heard the story, and of course, we have gone out with Jim and Julie. Jim has had Tony and me come up and host events there, Syracuse, and we have done it excitedly because we both love Jim. And it would seem like we always did. And I guess there was that point in which there was that tension. And basically, it was a tension that revealed what the growing pains of the conference and what the conference was doing at the time. Because Big John had fights with everybody, right? I mean, he and Rick Pitino almost came to blows one night in the Providence Civic Center. And after the game, we're trying to ask Big John about it. And he told me, I'm not sure how many he told that night. Maybe Dick Weiss was with me. And he told us how not only did he not hate Pitino, but he recommended Pitino when Providence, his alma mater, called and said, who should we talk to?
Wow.
Big John loved Pitino as a coach, but it didn't mean he wasn't ready to throw fists that night, right?
That's right.
So
surprise.
Right?
Surprise.
And Pitino was so surprised by it years later. It's funny, I was walking from Madison Square Garden back to Midtown with Rick after an NBA draft. We're walking back, and I said, you remember the night? And he laughed so hard he has to stop crossing the street. And he says, do you know how much I revered Big John at that point? And he wanted to fight in the middle of a game because somebody whistled a foul against Reggie Williams. And it brought back such great memories of, if that honest emotion wasn't out there, the conference never would have been what it was instantly, right? Yeah. If you didn't have Rolly and John and Coach Carnesecca and Jimmy, and if you didn't have all those guys willing to display that passion for their professions generally, but specifically for where they were coaching and what they were doing.
It was raw passion.
It was, man. It was great. It's what made the conference. And the fact that they could let it go. The fact that they lived it, they could let it go. They could see the value of it and the need for it when they did it. Mm-hmm. It says something huge to me about all of them and what they were willing to contribute to the effort.
And I would add to that, Mike, that not only that, but they were so competitive on the floor. But if Syracuse or Georgetown, when Georgetown played North Carolina, we were all screaming for Georgetown. When Georgetown played Houston in the finals, we were all screaming for Georgetown.
Which the ACC was never willing to do.
Yeah. That's right.
ACC was, I believe me, there's a woman standing outside the door over here who went to Virginia undergrad and Duke Law School. And she'll say, why does the ACC channel and the network, why does that not work like the Big Ten or in that stage, the B's? I say, because you guys couldn't pull for each other because you were so fractured and so knucklehead about it that you couldn't see the larger good. The ACC never had to because they had the marquee.
Right. Yep.
Big East had to do that. The Big Ten just always has done that naturally, strangely enough. But I'm with you because I've seen what you're describing.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I know you got close with Big John. We've had a lot of the guys on from Georgetown, and they talk about him, with fondness, and it was a tough guy. It was a tough love thing. It wasn't like Coach Mass and the relationship we had. The screaming part was pretty good, close. But, we'd get a hug afterwards, and Gene Smith's looking at me like, what are you talking about? So talk about your relationship. And I know he took a liking to you, Mike, right? I mean, he was he a guy that kind of mentored you a little bit as a young sports writer?
No, a lot. I said, I wrote after he passed away last summer, I wrote that I certainly never was good enough to play for Coach Thompson. That did not stop him, however, for coaching the hell out of me for 40 years. Yeah. And he did that. And I am so honored and sometimes overwhelmed by my relationships with Gene Smith, who I have a text from right now on the first 10 calls to return. When I'm finished with you guys, I have a text from Gene Smith.
Tell him you're with us and he can.
I text with Eric Smith. I talk to Patrick, or we communicate, and mostly text now. Sometimes if there's a particularly thrilling win or a tough loss, I will call Patrick.
Same.
Who told me also that if I didn't send my kid to him and his camp this summer as opposed to Northwestern's camp, he was going to stalk me and hunt me down. And so the relationship with those guys is amazing, because I was never their teammate. I was a guy covering them. And yet they extend this to me, and I know that's a large part because of Coach. And his sons, who I should mention first, JT3 and Ronnie, who I've known forever.
Yeah.
And when they invited me to his funeral, I was literally overwhelmed. Because we're in pandemic time. This wasn't something that could have been held at RFK, which of course it could have been held at RFK.
Yeah.
Under normal circumstances. But yeah, Coach, when and I'm trying to get emotional about this, when my dad passed at 60 years old from lung cancer on March 11th, so we're going into March Madness, right? The Georgetown had lost that year early in the Big East, so they were going to the tournament. And I just left the office to fly home to Chicago when I found out my father had died. And I get home, I need to talk to my mom in that instance. We need to get arrangements together. We need to talk about what has to be done with the family. My mother's on the phone. And she's on the phone like 40 minutes. And I'm annoyed now. Like, I want to go in and say, Mom, can you get off the goddamn phone? I mean, we got stuff to talk about. But I don't do that. So she finally gets off the phone, who knows, 45 minutes later. And I go, who the hell was that? And she says, that was Coach Thompson. And I said to her, what did you guys talk about? She said, I'm not allowed to tell you. And so later that afternoon, I go to the funeral home, and they're in the funeral home already. And I never called. I didn't call his office to say my dad passed. Nobody called that I knew of to ask me. There are no cell phones. It's 1986. And I get to the funeral home, and there's an enormous arrangement of flowers already there the day before the funeral that says, from Georgetown basketball. And there's another arrangement right next to it that says, from Georgetown athletics, as if they're not one and the same, right?
Yeah.
And so I never talked to him about that. Never did. Because there was really nothing to say.
Yep.
The act said it. Words
Said it
weren't
all.
necessary. Yeah. So, so did he mentor me? I mean, that really happened later. It really happened from the time I started writing a column, when I would call Big John to ask about serious stuff. I mean, the serious stuff, not are you gonna throw a boxing one on Chris Mullin? He didn't care about that shit. Yeah. I mean, he cared about it, but he didn't want to talk. That's not what he cared to talk about.
Right.
Want to talk about Proposition 48, Prop 42.
Right.
Yep.
Want to talk about cheating in college athletics. Yeah. Want to talk about expansion of conference play and relocation of teams and what might later in 20 years become a transfer portal. He wanted to talk about big stuff. He wanted to talk about drug lords trying to get a hold of his kids in the city of Washington, D.C. in the 1980s, when D.C. had the largest outdoor drug market of any city in the world. He wanted to talk about that. He once put me in his car and said, we're going to look for one of these drug kingpins. We're going to look for him. I wanted to say, Coach, what if we find him and all I got is a notebook? But I didn't dare ask that. But the mentoring did not take the form of calling me himself, telling me what I should do. It was real life shit. Yeah, real life stuff, like I'm telling you. And so, he's one of the most important figures, in my adult life as a man.
Well, let me ask you a question. When you go into sports writing, right?
Uh-huh.
It's not chock full of African-American writers, right?
One of the reasons why Ray Leonard remembered me is because I was the only Black writer who was in the crowd that day.
Right.
And I'm sure he turned to somebody and said, who is that dude? How did he get there? And And I looked every bit of what I was, which was 21 years old. No, there weren't. It cut both ways. I mean, for people who didn't want to talk to you, I never wasted my time with those people who were suspect of my credentials or me.
Yeah.
I never tried to talk to them because there were too many other people who wanted to, or who were thrown off, but not in a bad way, by me being the only one. You know, you think the coaches weren't going to remember who I was? Yeah, I knew they knew, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And so that part of it, you know, worked to my advantage. I knew they knew who I was, and now it was up to me to impress them professionally in a way that would make them continue to remember, not just see me once and think, oh yeah, I know his name. I know his work. Yeah. That's what I wanted. Yeah. And so when I could call Coach Boeheim's office, and I was told at first he was busy, and then he'd pick up or call me right away, I knew that was the work, that he trusted my work. Yeah. To this day. One time, I asked Jim very early on, when was his first trip to the Final Four as a coach? What year was that? 80, the Indiana
87, right? Against
87,
Indiana.
87, right, 87. I would say Keith Smart. I don't want to piss Sonny off.
You're killing me already. Keep going.
I know. So my sports editor, like, this is a natural thing, says, hey, you need to go up to Syracuse to see if you can sit down and talk to Coach Boeheim. Like, what kind of request is that on the eve of the Final Four? I'm still in my 20s. And I called the office and I said to the secretary, God forgive me for not remembering her name.
Norma.
Yeah. And I said, Norma, this is Mike Wilbon from Washington Post. I understand this can't happen, but I have to put the request in anyway. Can I come up and talk to Coach Boeheim tomorrow? And she says, Mike, I don't think so, but, you know, let me call you back. About 2 hours later, I get a call back and it says, be in the office here at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning. I get the first flight out, which, you know, Jim knew all the times of the flights from Washington to Syracuse. He'd been on enough of them. I was on the 8 o'clock flight and I came and he had me in his office. We walked around the gym and we talked. I had an hour with Coach. Let's say it was Tuesday and they left for Final Four on Wednesday or something.
Right. Yeah.
That sound right, Sonny?
Sounds right, yeah.
That's when you know somebody respects your work.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't let me come because he knew I was the only.
Right.
He knew I was the only at some point, but he let me come up there and he talked to me because he knew my work. And so, yeah, but it was, you know, there was ugly shit. I was not privy to a lot of it. I heard about it later. I know that certain people have come up to me in years subsequent as my friend and apologized for stuff that happened then.
Sure.
Wow.
But you're breaking barriers. Thompson's breaking barriers. There's got to be some really common ground. Yeah, and he knew. He suspected. He knew some of it. As a matter of fact, I mean, John was. You had to prove. He didn't even talk to me my first year on the beat. He didn't talk to me.
Well, he had to gain you. He had to gain trust, right?
And he wanted to see
that's how he was. He didn't.
You want to see.
He didn't let a lot of people
about my work. Yeah, exactly right, Chuck. And he said to me later, "I needed to see how you went about your business."
Yeah, I believe that.
And I got to know all the other coaches in the conference, so I could cover Georgetown. And he loved that. He told me he did years later. Yeah. And I respected that. First of all, it made me better at what I did. And then when John went to bat for you, when he went to bat for you, he didn't go to bat for you because you were a number, you were an oddity. Right. He went to bat because he believed it and he was going to crush somebody's ass for messing with you. So if he went to bat for you, then there was something that really agitated him about what was happening to you.
But he was all in.
He was all in. And you still didn't know it. It's not like he was going to come to you and tell you.
Yeah, he couldn't show the soft side. Like he said with your mother, there's no way your mom could tell him all the nice things that he was telling. That's right. And he wanted to know. He wanted to ask about my father, or like, you know, he knew, you know, that this was best kept private, but here's something he needed to do for himself. So yeah, it's weird. I'm glad I didn't know all this stuff then. I didn't know any of this then.
Well, it's got to be a tremendous feeling, Mike, to have somebody respect you for what you do you know, like you said, and you're getting in now, you're getting in and you're able to get stories and talk to people the way nobody else can, because you have the guys respect, whether it's Boeheim or Big John.
I hope so, because I all those guys. I mean, yeah, Coach Carnesecca.
That's awesome.
Coach Carnesecca, I was in Queens during a snowstorm, and I couldn't get a taxi. God knows there's no Ubers. How are you supposed to get from Jamaica, Queens, back to LaGuardia in a snowstorm?
Right.
Louis drove me.
Oh, really?
He drove me. He gave me a ride. He said, "Get in the car." And I said, "Coach," he goes, "Get in the car, get in the car." Smack my face.
Yep, that's how he is.
So those guys,
he was pinching your cheek. That's an Italian.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So it was a crazy time, man. You know, the conference and all my friends who were covering my colleagues who were covering the ACC thought they had it better. I'm like, no, you actually don't. You really don't.
Yeah. Talk about some of the guys on the Georgetown team. You know, I mean, talk about a group was misunderstood, and I get why Coach had that facade up, that the Hoya paranoia, whatever you want to call it. He protected his guys. He was overprotective, like it was his kids. You know.
Yeah. When I wasn't behind the curtain early on, but when you get behind it, or just because they're about my age. I mean, I'm like 2 years older than all those guys. I mean, like 4 years older than Patrick, but the guys who were already there, Freddie Brown, Gene Smith, Eric Smith, Ron Blaylock, Ralph Dalton came in with Patrick. Like, I got to, like, now I know all those guys as just grown men and, professionally, and kids and families and wives and this and that and heartache. And then, but I got to know those guys when they were younger, and they're working on Wall Street and they're interning at these incredible places, right? And people were saying they were stupid, they couldn't read.
Yeah.
And I saw what was going on.
Yeah.
I knew what was going on. I know Fred Brown. Fred Brown wasn't just a guy who threw the ball to James Worthy. Fred Brown's a guy I know. I knew all those guys. And I say knew because some of them I still know, like Gene and Eric Smith and Patrick. And I mentioned the guys that I still, keep up with. Some guys I haven't seen in years and years and years. But they were students because they had to be, because Big John wasn't having it any other way.
That's right.
People have no idea.
Nope.
I know the deal. We've had a bunch of them on. Yeah.
Yes.
Mary Fenlon was a big part of that because they had to call her at 10 o'clock at night. You'd think that was done by accident. Now they can't be out doing things. They got to stay in to call her.
Yes.
Yeah, it was non-negotiable.
It was non-negotiable. And guys thought that was easy. I remember thinking, like running into them out maybe at a party. And they were, because again, I was at that time, so I'm 24 and we're all just barely grown. They're 20, 21. And they got to like leave to go back to the dorm. And I'm like laughing now. Because I'm like, oh, these are the big, tough Georgetown guys everybody's scared of. They can't, they have no rules to govern them. And they're running back to a, former nun at 10 o'clock at night. I mean, this is, and John loved the portrayal, the inaccurate portrayal of it.
Yeah. He set that whole thing up. It was magical. It really was. It was. A complete.
Sonny, let me tell you this. There's no way. I've talked to Grant Hill about this, and there are people who were recruited or whose parents were called because John knew the parent because they were here, like Danny Ferry. Like I think the meeting was with John and Bob Ferry, and then Danny came in, whatever that was, which they described to me later. And then of course Grant Hill. These are DC people thinking them as Dukies. Okay, they wound up being Dukies, but they also could have gone to Georgetown. And I know enough about that process to know, man, there's no way I would have gone to Georgetown. It's just too hard.
Yeah.
The demands were just too tough. And people say, why did so-and-so transfer? Or why did so-and-so transfer? Because this shit was hard.
Yeah. Reggie left for a week.
He did.
He left.
We talked about it.
He told Sonny and I at dinner, he goes, listen, man, if I could have taken the mattress with me, I would have taken that too.
That's great.
He was, I didn't tell nobody, just bounced.
That's so great. And Reggie is one of my, I should have mentioned Reggie when I mentioned the guy's all-time favorites, was Reggie, and it's hard. it's hard, but look at those guys, the way that they turned out, man. You think Alonzo Mourning wanted Big John putting word out on the street? This guy's messing with my kid, have him come to my office. Think they like that?
No.
I know they didn't, because I was one of the ones having to write about the damn thing 2 days later.
Wow.
So let me ask you this, because it was notorious, like you couldn't talk to certain players or what have you. Was that something that you absolutely had to respect, or did you get a little bit more leeway?
I respected it, and that created the leeway.
Okay.
I never acted like I wanted to, like I really needed to talk to anybody. That's just my own way of doing things, whether it was a Georgetown kid, Michael Jordan, John Elway. I acted like they were I treated it as if I was dealing with the prettiest girl in the class, and I wasn't going to act too anxious to ever talk to her either. And early on, that worked.
I should have taken some lessons from him a long time ago.
It
Is
worked.
that how you do it?
It worked for me, and it wasn't going to work for everybody, and it didn't work for everybody. And sometimes I'm sure it didn't work for me. I was never chasing the crowd of reporters with microphones and notebooks. Never. I was always back over here in the corner waiting. And I've had guys tell me that they talked to me because I wasn't in the scrum. Yeah. I've had famous players tell me that later. And so I did that with Georgetown too. I had the first interview with Patrick on New Year's Eve. Freshmen couldn't talk until second semester. And I sat, John, it's not an accident that my seat was next to Patrick Ewing's. I was in the middle seat on Piedmont Airlines, flying from wherever it was to Washington, D.C., and Patrick was on the aisle seat. And we sort of did the first interview, his first. But I didn't ask. Everybody else was asking, including my editors. And I was like, yeah, whenever. We'll get to it.
Right.
Wow.
So they wanted you to play, a card.
That's my life now. I don't do that shit now.
How'd that work out for you, Mike? Now you're in the Hall of Fame, right? Not bad.
Lucky. Probably. Bad. I mean, I think going against the grain is something that I enjoy doing. But like everybody was chasing Chris Mullin, in those regular season games, I would always go over to Mark Jackson. I teased Mark. I'm like, I got it right. I got one right. The guy who was going to be the coach and the broadcaster, my colleague, I got it right. I literally, you can go back and look at the stories where I'm quoting Mark Jackson at 18 years old. My sports editor said, are you aware there's a kid on St. John's named Chris Mullin, who's a freaking All-America? Who's this Mark Jackson? I said, he's going to be a coach. He's going to be a coach one day. This kid's brilliant.
Yeah, he's some player.
He was. And so anyway, I wasn't chasing those interviews. I was glad to get them. I think once you get one, it can kind of roll a little bit after that. But I got lucky. That's all. My approach was a lucky approach. That's all I'm going to attribute it to.
What were some of your best memories of Big East games, moments, tournaments?
I was talking about this the other night with. So I'm working obviously with Mike Greenberg and Stephen A. and Jalen, and I'm older than everybody. And I can talk about games they saw on TV as kids that I covered. And so we talked about this the other night, and Stephen A. said, we were talking about Syracuse, Georgetown. And I told him, I think the most exciting college basketball game I ever saw was in the Dome. I forget the year, but there were 11 seconds left in the game, and Pearl Washington gets the ball thrown.
It's a shot at the elbow.
To me, it was Addison, but it didn't have to be. I could get that part wrong. And he shoots a teardrop, and the ball is up, and the buzzer goes off, and the ball goes through. And Georgetown had won 31 consecutive road games.
Right.
Let's find that among today's college basketball teams, right? Yeah. So on Saturday afternoon, Georgetown had lost to St. John's. I think it was 66-64.
Yeah, those are the only two losses they had that year.
At Capitol, what was it called? Jesus.
Cap Center, yeah.
Cap Center. Remember the score, but not the arena in the town I live in. So Chris Mullin had just a fabulous game. St. John's wins that game. Then they put the real streak was 31 in a row on the line at Monday night. Big Monday. Big Monday. All these other games are shit compared to that. Big Monday, Syracuse, Georgetown, like 20 inches of snow. I didn't think I was going to get there. And Pearl Washington drops that bad boy in.
You want me to tell you? Do you want me to tell you what the play coach behind the diagram?
Yes, I want to hear this because I've never asked anybody
He
since.
said he put his board out. He was like, "Get the ball to Pearl," and then he drew a bunch of circles, and that was it. It worked like a charm.
Get out of the way.
Who threw the inbounds pass?
Oh, I don't think it was Raph, because Raph was going for the rebound on the weak side.
Oh, of course. Of course.
I think it might have been Sean. It was usually our four-man, so it might have been Sean. Could have been Wendell, because that was Pearl's freshman year, so that was 84, and that was in the dome. Yeah.
But you know the shot I'm talking about.
I know. It's from the left elbow.
People crashed the court. They ran over Rich Shavotkin, the voice of the Hoyas, right? And he's on the floor being trampled, and he's got the microphone at his face. And I remember with 11 seconds left, I was scared. I'm looking at this crowd, and I walked to the end of the tunnel with my laptop because I was terrified. I was like, this is not going to go well. Either way, this is not going to go well. And Pearl hits that shot. And that, of all the games I covered, and back then, covering the conference in Georgetown also meant for me, because I was the young single guy. I was 25 years old. It meant I went to Madison Square Garden. I stayed over at Syracuse, not just the Monday night game, but I stayed till Wednesday when Providence came in. You know, I went on Friday before the Saturday Georgetown Villanova game. I stopped at somewhere and covered something else. So I got to see an absurd number of those games and loved them. And I'm a Big Ten kid. I grew up on Big Ten basketball. I covered the ACC. Michael Jordan's freshman year, I was 23 years old. I was covering the ACC that year with Len Bias and Michael Jordan. And I thought I believe to this day that the Big East was tougher. It was nastier. It was more contentious. It was definitely more physical. And while the ACC, I'm never going to argue against the merits of the ACC. Right. The Big East in those 3 or 4 years was just a better league. Top to bottom, better league. And didn't mean it had a better player, but it did have Patrick Ewing and Pearl. I mean, the Pearl Washington thing, it makes me sad that people don't know how great Pearl was today. That I have to say to my son, when he starts talking about the greatest college point guards, I have to say, okay, you have to go to YouTube now. You have to look up Dwayne Pearl Washington and then come back and talk to me. You know, and so for me, you know, that's just great shit, man. That's great
stuff. Hey, when you text Jeannie back, just tell him, hey, Pearl. That's all you got to say to him.
Well, I don't get in the way of that one. I don't get in the way of those two.
Yeah. Just well, he jokes about it. Like he's in every highlight film that Pearl is in. You know, he says, and Dean was the best defensive player in the Big East at that time.
Remains the best defensive guard, the best defensive point guard on the ball.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I've ever seen. He had to play against. Look at the people he had to play against. For God's sake, they were all in the NBA.
Yeah.
You know, he's great. So yeah, I remember. I don't remember games as specifically as I remember that game with Pearl. But the moments I remember, and Mullen and Ewing, I remember all that stuff. It's 40 years later.
Yeah.
40 years later. And, you know, yeah, I remember a lot of it. And I remember Jordan versus Bias too. I was there for that stuff. It's a great axis. The Washington, D.C. is the axis of what for 10 years was the best basketball in America. Because not only did you have the Big East with all those characters, like 7 of them who went to the Final Four or whatever it was. You had the ACC with Dean and Krzyzewski and Jordan and Bias and Ralph. But you had and Worthy and Perkins. You stop and you remember how many people you're leaving out. Then on a Tuesday night, on an off-brand night, I would hop in the car and drive to Annapolis and watch David Robinson score 50 and kick somebody's ass.
Yep. How
right?
Is that?
I could go to GW and watch Mike Brown, who wound up having a cup of coffee in the league. And so you just had people, you had games and leagues and schools that played the best basketball. And I know that from 1980 to 1988, 1989, that includes Mourning and Dikembe, nobody saw better basketball than I did. No one. I would tell Dick Weiss that. I would tell Bob Ryan that. I'm like, dude, I can just sit here. You guys are always flying to my town. I don't have to leave my neighborhood.
You had Dunbar, DeMatha. You had some best high school.
I had Dunbar, DeMatha. I had high school. I saw Sherman Douglas throw down a reverse dunk on a lob pass on Danny Ferry's head in a high school championship game.
Yep.
Right here at Cole Fieldhouse.
The general.
Didn't have to leave. Didn't have to go anywhere. I saw the best basketball.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. It's pretty good. We're getting close. We're getting close here on time, Mike. So
I'm sorry, I won't be so long-winded. That's my bad.
I have to say, in following you and doing this, you've been a pioneer of sorts. Now you're one of the first guys to come from the media, from the newspaper end of it, and get into the different medias, the radio, the television, and now social media. Talk about that. Talk about going from the newspaper into the current day stuff. You're everywhere. Every time we put on ESPN, you're there. And talk about what it's like now with talk about what it's like now with the social media aspect and how it's changed everything.
Look, I hate that end of it because I think that young sports writers don't watch the goddamn game.
Right.
Watch the game. They don't watch the game. They're tweeting and they're looking at their phones and they're coming up with all these analytics, all of that shit I hate. And so we've gotten to a point now where I'm just an old man screaming, get off my lawn. And it's probably time for me to check out. But I didn't think of myself as a pioneer because I grew up. So there's a couple of names of people that I grew up who in Chicago were pioneers while I was 10 years old. And they are Brent Musburger. People see Brent on television, they think Brent was always on TV. Brent covered the Chicago Bears as a beat writer when I was a kid. So I read about Gale Sayers and Dick Butkus through Brent Musburger, right? Then there was a guy, Wendell Smith, and people ask me all the time, well, did you ever see anybody who looked like you? Yeah. Wendell Smith was writing in the Black Press, writing in the Chicago Defender, might have been writing for the Pittsburgh Courier. I'm not sure of all the papers he wrote for, but I read him in the Chicago Defender and in the Chicago Sun-Times and probably Daily News. Pioneer in terms of race and occupationally. He then was on channel WGN, the same WGN that everybody watched to see the Cubs when they were younger or whatever. He was on TV, a black man in the 60s, the 1960s, on TV, and I read his column. And Brent Musburger. I did not aspire to be them, but I idolized them. Both of them. I got to tell Brent that several times. He tells me to shut up. And I got to tell Mr. Smith's widow that. So this was always there. This was not something I found to be foreign. I didn't aspire to do it. When I got a column at the Washington Post, that was it. I was done. That's as far as I needed to go. That's what I aspired to do. I was 29 years old, turning 30. I thought 30 was as young as you ever needed to be and have a column. I thought it was too young because you didn't know enough about real life. You didn't know how to be a father. I became a father at 50. So I was 20 years away from becoming a father. I didn't know anything. I wasn't married. I didn't know jack. And I thought you needed to have lived real life to become a columnist. Luckily, my sports editor, George Solomon, didn't see it that way. But so the transition to TV was very slow. It was incremental. Being on Sports Reporters with other people I'm sure you've had on this podcast, with Bob Ryan and Mitch and Mike Lupica and all the people from the Northeast Corridor particularly, right? We were all, so that's when that started for me when I was in my 30s. And Joe Valerio, the late great Joe Valerio, put me on. And so it was piecemeal. Like it wasn't a big thing like, okay, we're gonna take you out of press row now and put you, it was like, hey, can you come on the show? Can you appear on this panel? Can you do this 3-minute segment on CNN? Whatever it was. And then you could see that this was the wave of the future. I never aspired to host a show. I didn't care about that. I said no to that offer several times before saying yes to it. So the transition was one. I was 42 years old by the time we started PTI. So I was not a baby anymore. It's 20 and a half years, 20 years ago in 6 months. So, you know, I was ready for that then. I understood the way it was going. I understood you could reach many more people in locker rooms on TVs than you could by the aughts with a newspaper column. They worked hand in hand at one point. Now they barely do that. And so people say, do you miss the Washington Post? Yes, I miss it, but I would have missed it anyway. Because if I had tried to stay and make that last till now, that wasn't going to happen. Makes me very sad, but I would have missed it anyway.
So, Mike, talking about your idols, right? Wendell and Brent. Now you got your other idol, Tony Kornheiser. We got to talk about Tony, right? Now, Tony, you know he's a Binghamton guy, so I got a little bit of love for Tony.
Every day. Are you kidding me? Every day. Every day I have to hear about that. And the funny thing, you guys should hear Boeheim give him shit about Binghamton. It's so funny that Jim can do it. It's
smooth.
Jim, most people who watch, and they can watch basketball for 40 years, college hoops, they have no idea how funny Jim Boeheim is. They have no idea what a great after-dinner speaker, during dinner speaker, how funny he is, how he can just give people shit, and it's so smooth and it's so effortless. And you realize Jim played basketball and was pretty damn good at that. But Tony, I met Tony when he was working at Newsday. No, I didn't. He had just come over to the Post from Newsday. So we got there at the same time. I was an intern. He was 10 years in. And, you know, people can know that Tony did Monday Night Football. They can hear him talk about football and all that shit. Tony's a basketball head. And the people who object most is trying to act like he's a football guy are guys who knew him 50 years ago, like Jim Boeheim. And they'll say, hey, we tell your partner, he can talk about football all he wants. He doesn't know shit about football. We know he's a basketball guy. We know he was in the Palestra every Saturday of his life when he was 24 years old. It's funny. It's just, you know, John Chaney and Big John. Big John would say, tell Tony, I love the fact that he's making money from Monday Night Football. I know he's a pumpkin head, you know, and it's just, it would go on and on like that. And it's so funny that his roots are there. His roots are New York City and basketball. No matter what he goes and tries to do and make millions of dollars off of, his roots are that. He gets so excited when like Binghamton beats, who did Binghamton beat last week? Binghamton beat
Stony Brook.
Stony Brook. Yeah. Oh my God.
You got all jacked up about that.
He was beaming. I got to hear you're attacking Stony Brook. You're a grown man. Stop. And it's, you know, it's who he is. And so all this other stuff, big time.
That's the magic of the show. Is the magic.
That is the magic. That's what I'm about to say. That's what makes the show work. You know, you can tell you guys are good friends.
That's who we are. I mean, at our root, no matter what, you know, we play golf with Barack Obama. But what brings him the most joy in his life is beating Stony Brook. This is just, you know, this is what
he sets the bar high.
Now, Mike, did you let the president win, or how did that work out?
This happens to be sitting here. I'm not supposed to show it, but I am. This is a flag from the course at Andrews Air Force Base.
Right.
Okay.
And it says to Mike something about the $11. Can you see this? The $11 he had to pay me. I got the flag on 18 from 44.
How great is that?
I got a picture of him handing me $11 too.
That's great. Good thing you didn't play with.
He was when he was in office. But one of the things he said to me, to both of us, then was, when I'm out of office, I'm going to practice and play every day. And he does. And he would wear my ass out. Now, I want 3 strokes aside from him now. He's way better than both of us.
Lefty, right?
Lefty, yeah.
Yeah.
Good thing you didn't play with PJ Carlissimo. You never would have saw the 11.
You never would have saw anything.
I've played with PJ, and I think he still owes me money. And by the way, I don't dare mention those coaches without mentioning PJ and even Bill Raftery. Real quickly, Bill Raftery destroyed my first story ever Big East Georgetown game against Seton Hall at McDonough Arena. Raftery comes out of his jacket. He comes right out of the jacket at a call he hates, and he pounds my computer.
Yeah, he's legendary.
Like Stone Age then, a computer. And he knocks the story out. The lights go out of the computer. I'm on deadline. I'm 21 years old. I'm going to get fired. And I'm sure I'm cursing him because I don't even know Bill at that point. Out of the locker room, I'm trying to reconstruct my story. Bill Raftery, this is a true story. Bill comes out of, this is my first Big East game. Bill comes out of the locker room and says, I'm Coach Bill Raftery. I said, I'm Mike Wilbon from the Washington Post. And he says, I heard I destroyed your story, kid. And I said, yes, you did. He takes a chair and he turns it around and he sits down and he says, I'm going to help you reconstruct it if it takes all night. And he sat in the chair and he gave me funny quotes and he said all kinds of stuff, none of which was any good on the reconstruction of the story. But the fact is that Bill Raftery, a Division I coach, was willing to sit there for an hour to help me reconstruct a story he had killed when I was 21 years old. I may be just 22.
Not surprised.
That doesn't surprise us.
So you want to know who my favorite coach of all time in the Big East is? You know, it's probably Bill for that very purpose.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I tell you what, this has been a blast, man. I mean, we really had a good time. I hope you had fun, Mike. We really.
I hope it's been worth it. Since you guys claim you wanted me to do it, I hope it's been worth it.
Oh, it's great.
Absolutely. Are you kidding me?
It's fun. It's fun for me because that represents a time of my life, which is now, first of all, I could see it when the Big East did the 30-30, right? I could see it. You know, I was in it. I was in too much of it. But when I see Mark Jackson, when I see Chris Mullin, and I see all the NBA guys, and they're now alums, they've been retired 20 years. I see those guys, and we start talking about games, and they know that I remember these things for a living because I had to. And so I become the arbiter sometimes. You know, with Sherman Douglas, my neighbor here in Potomac, Maryland, and, you know, I become the arbiter of, wait a minute, did you see he didn't take that shot? He didn't make that. That was a charge. That was a block. Lenny Wirtz made a bad call. You know, whatever. Dick Paparo. You know, and with the coaches too, they expect me to remember this stuff. I don't remember anything. And it's so this is a slice of my life which I don't get to indulge in very often. And so it's a great pleasure. And I gotta listen. I got all the links to stuff you guys have done. So that's gonna be good airplane reading for me this March Madness. I'm gonna put it on and relive it.
Mike, just so you know, Chuck and I are sending a little message back and forth, and it's like, I got one more question. We don't want to let you go, man.
Right.
I appreciate that, man. This has been fun. This is much more fun than me sitting and watch the Bulls get their ass kicked by the Suns tonight because the Bulls don't have any players. They're all hurt. Wow. So I'm in a bad mood anyway. So you guys are helping stave that off for a couple of hours.
Well, we aim to please, Mike. You know, that's the kind of guys we are. You know what I'm saying?
That's the kind of guys we are. That's
I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys.
Well, listen, thank you again to our guest today, the Hall of Famer, Chicago's own Michael Wilbon. Mike, thanks again so much for joining us.
Sonny, thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Pleasure.
Absolutely.
Big East Rewind was brought to you by Nick Chico Chorus and Daryl Gurney, produced and directed by Sonny, and I can be reached through Gmail at bigeastrewind@gmail.com. You check us out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts from. Put in Big East Rewind in the search bar, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Thanks a lot. I hope you had fun joining us. Have a great night.